Hello, BookTube. I am continuing a read to you, a read with us, a read aloud event that I'm doing with Mark at Book Time with Elvis. We are reading The Warden by Anthony Trollope. I don't want to block the little bean, very sleepy little bean. This is a short novel, much shorter than some of Trollope's behemoths, and we are swapping off chapters. Mark's doing all the odd chapters, I'm doing all the even-numbered chapters, and it's the story of a small town, Barchester, and in that small town there is a hospital for indigent members of the town, older men who can no longer earn their own bread and don't really have families. They are beadsmen. They are in this charitable hospital, Hiram's Hospital. And the hospital was founded centuries ago on plots of land, and in the ensuing centuries, the value of that land has gone up a lot, so that technically, under a reading of common law, the beadsmen at Hiram's Hospital are actually owed more than the tiny bit of shillings that they get a day. The presenter of the hospital gets £800 a year, a staggering amount of money for the time we're talking about. And in the course of, as this novel begins, a young man, a young surgeon, although not really a practicing surgeon, named John Bold, has decided out of the blue that is a wrong that must be righted, even if it means that the presenter, who is a friend of his and father of the young woman that he loves, comes to grief for it. And the rumor of this controversy is now full-blown in Barchester, and sides are being drawn, and it's the plot is well along, even though at this point we're up to chapter 6. The plot is the very illustration of A Tempest in a Teapot. It is the very illustration of that. It's Trollope's genius to make you care even so. He's not writing about the Battle of Borodino, but he still makes you care. And as we embark on chapter 6, which is called The Warden's Tea Party, I am more and more aware of the number one obstacle that I am going to have in this read to you, in this read aloud event, and that is to refrain from hours of commentary on the text I'm reading. The goal here should be for me to simply read the chapter to you, because somewhere down the line I'm sure that somebody's going to put these into a playlist so they can hear the whole of The Warden by Anthony Trollope just recited to them. They're not going to want that experience interrupted with, oh, and did you notice? Oh, and did you notice? In some quacky Boston accent. I'm going to try to restrain myself. I tried last time. I didn't do a very good job. I'm going to try again. So we're going to read chapter 6, The Warden's Tea Party. And the Warden is Mr. Harding. He is the person who runs Hiram's Hospital. After much painful doubting, on one thing only could Mr. Harding resolve. He determined that at any rate he would take no offense, and he would make this question no cause of quarrel either with Bold, John Bold, the troublemaker, or with the beadsmen who are under his charge. In furtherance of this resolution, he himself wrote a note to Mr. Bold the same afternoon, inviting him to meet a few friends and hear some music on an evening named in the next week. Had not this little party been promised to Eleanor, that is, we'll meet. Yeah, no more interjections. Had not this little party been promised to Eleanor, in his present state of mind he would probably have avoided such gaiety, but the promise had been given and the invitations were to be written, and when Eleanor consulted her father on the subject, she was not ill-pleased to hear him say, "Oh, I was thinking of Bold, so I took it into my head to write to him myself, but you must write to his sister." Eleanor is Mr. Harding's daughter. She is in love with John Bold, and he is in love with her. John Bold has a sister who's a few years older than he is. Mary Bold was older than her brother, and at the time of our story was just over 30. She was not an unattractive young woman, though by no means beautiful. Her great merit was the kindliness of her disposition. She was not very clever, nor very animated, nor had she apparently the energy of her brother, but she was guided by the high principles of right and wrong. Her temper was sweet, and her faults were fewer in number than her virtues. Those who casually met Mary Bold thought little of her, but those who knew her well loved her well, and the longer they knew her, the more they loved her. Among those who were fondest of her was Eleanor Harding, and though Eleanor had never openly talked to her of her brother, each understood the other's feelings about him. The brother and sister were sitting together when the 2 notes were brought in. "How odd," said Mary, "that they should send 2 notes. Well, if Mr. Harding becomes fashionable, the world is going to change. that is a comment I doubt that any annotated version of this novel, Oxford or Penguin or anybody else, would explain it. But it's a little joke, it's a little jest at the fact that separate notes were written to each person expected to come to the party, which for the nanosecond that Trollope was thinking was actually the fashion of doing it, instead of sending it to the eldest male and naming the other people who would come along. It's a small thing. It's not going to be annotated, so I thought I would mention. That's why she's talking about Mr. Harding becoming fashionable. Her brother understood immediately the nature and intention of the peace offering, but it was not easy for him to behave well in the matter as it was for Mr. Harding. It is much less difficult for the sufferer to be generous than for the oppressor. John Bold felt that he could not go to the warden's party. He never loved Eleanor better than he did now. He had never so strongly felt how anxious he was to make her his wife as now, so when so many obstacles to his doing appeared in view. Yet here was her father himself, as it was clearing the way for these very obstacles, and still he felt that he could not go to the house any more as an open friend, because he is attacking what he views as an injustice on the part of Hiram's Hospital, which is overseen by Mr. Harding. There's no way he can attack the hospital without attacking his friend. As he sat thinking of these things with the note in his hand, his sister was waiting for his decision. "Well," she said, "I suppose we must write separate answers, and both say we shall be very happy." "You'll go, of course, Mary," said he, to which she readily assented. "I cannot," he continued, looking serious and gloomy. "I wish I could, with all my heart." "And why not, John?" said she. She had as yet heard nothing of the newfound abuse which her brother was about to reform, at least nothing which connected it with her brother's name. He sat thinking for a while, till he determined that it would be best to tell her at once what it was that he was about. It must be done sooner or later. "I fear I cannot go to Mr. Harding's house any more as a friend, just at present." "Oh, John, why not? Ah, you've quarrelled with Eleanor." "No, indeed," said he. "I've no quarrel with her as yet." "What is it, John?" said she, looking at him with anxious, loving face, for she knew well how much of his heart was there in that house, which he had said he could no longer visit. "Why," said he at last, "I've taken up the case of those 12 old men at Hiram's Hospital, and of course that brings me into contact with Mr. Harding. I may have to oppose him, interfere with him, perhaps injure him." Mary looked at him steadily for some time before she committed herself to reply, and then merely asked him what he meant to do for the old men. "Why, it's a long story, and I don't know that I can make you understand it. John Hiram made a will, and left his property in charity to certain poor old men, and the proceeds, instead of going to the benefit of these men, chiefly goes into the pocket of the warden and the bishop's steward." "And you mean to take away from Mr. Harding his share of it?" "I don't know what I mean yet. I mean to inquire about it. I mean to see who is entitled to this property. I mean to see, if I can, that justice is done to the poor of the city of Barchester generally, who are in fact the legatees under the will. I mean, in short, to put the matter right, if I can." "And why are you to do this, John?" "You might ask the same question of anybody else," said he, "and according to that, the duty of righting these men would belong to nobody. If we are to act on that principle, the weak are never to be protected, injustice is never to be opposed, and no one is to struggle for the poor." And Bold began to comfort himself in the warmth of his own virtue. "But is there no one else to do this but you, who have known Mr. Harding so long? Surely, John, as a friend, as a young friend, so much younger than Mr. Harding." "That's woman's logic all over, Mary. What has age to do with it? Another man might plead that he was too old. And as to his friendship, if the thing itself be right, private motives should never be allowed to interfere. Because I esteem Mr. Harding, is that a reason that I should neglect a duty which I owe to these old men? Or should I give up a work which my conscience tells me is a good one, because I regret the loss of his society?" As I've mentioned on a couple of my last readings, John Bold is a Twitter blue checkmark. "And Eleanor, John?" said the sister, looking timidly into her brother's face. "Eleanor, that is, Miss Harding, if she thinks fit, that is, if her father, or rather, if she, or indeed he, if they find it necessary, there is no necessity now to talk about Eleanor Harding, but this I will say, that if she has the kind of spirit for which I give her credit, she will not condemn me for doing that which I think to be a duty." And Bold consoled himself with the consolation of a Roman. Here the Trollope is alluding to the famous stoicism of the Romans and their putting of duty ahead of everything. Mary sat silent for a while, till at last her brother reminded her that the notes must be answered, and she got up and placed her desk before her, took out her pen and her paper, wrote on it slowly, "My dear Eleanor, I—" then stopped and looked at her brother. "Well, Mary, why don't you write it?" So he's just sitting there watching her do this. "Oh, John," she said, "dear John, pray think better of this." "Think better of what?" said he. "Of this about the hospital, of all of this about Mr. Harding, of what you say about these old men. Nothing can call upon you, no duty can require you to set yourself against your oldest, your best friend. Oh, John, think of Eleanor. You will break her heart and your own." "Nonsense, Mary. Miss Harding's heart is as safe as yours." "Pray, pray, for my sake, John, give it up. You know how dearly you love her." And she came and knelt before him on the rug. "Pray, give it up. You are going to make yourself and her father miserable. You are going to make us all miserable. And for what? For a dream of justice. You will never make those 12 men happier than they now are." "You don't understand it, my girl," he said, smoothing her hair with his hand. She's 5 years older than he is. "I do understand it, John. I understand that this is a chimera, a dream that you have got. I know well that no duty can require you to do this mad, this suicidal thing. I know you love Eleanor Harding with all your heart, and I tell you now she loves you as well. If there was a plain, a positive duty before you, I would be the last to bid you to neglect it for any woman's love. But this, oh, think again, before you do anything to make it necessary that you and Mr. Harding should be at variance." He did not answer, and as she knelt there, leaning on his knees, but by his face she thought that he might be inclined to yield. "And at any rate, let me say that you will go to this party. At any rate, do not break with them while your mind is in doubt." And she got up, hoping to conclude her note in the way she desired, but she shouldn't have mentioned that he was feeling doubt, because that pricks his vanity, which is, I think, where this whole crusade comes from. But she did mention doubt, and that was enough. "My mind is not in doubt," at last he said, rising. "I could never respect myself again were I to give way now because Eleanor Harding is beautiful. I do love her. I would give a hand to hear her tell me what you have said, speaking on her behalf. But I cannot, for her sake, go back from the task which I have commenced. I hope she may hereafter acknowledge and respect my motives, but I cannot now be a guest at her father's house." And the Barchester Brutus went out to fortify his own resolution by meditations on his own virtue. And the Barchester Brutus there is referring to a character from ancient Roman history who endorsed the condemnation of his own sons for treason. In other words, this mythical Roman elevation of the duties to idealism, to a dream of justice, as Eleanor puts it, over personal obligations. And it's pretty clear what the narrator thinks of that. Poor Mary Bold sat down and sadly finished her note, saying that she would herself attend the party, but that her brother was unavoidably prevented from doing so. I fear that she did not admire, as she should have done, the self-devotion of his singular virtue. The party went off as such parties do. There were fat old ladies in fine silk dresses, and slim young ladies in gauze muslin frocks. Here I want to insert a note about those fat old ladies at the party. Read Cranford. Don't underestimate those fat old ladies. They all had gigantic tumults of fiery passion in their past. You shouldn't imitate Jane Austen herself by looking at those fat old ladies at the neighborhood dance and dismissing them. But anyway, I'm rather fond of fat old ladies, that's why. Anyway, old gentlemen stood up with their backs to the empty fireplace, looking by no means so comfortable as they would have done in their own armchairs at home, and young gentlemen, rather stiff about the neck, clustered near the door, not as yet sufficiently encouraged to attack the muslin frocks who awaited the battle, drawn up in a semicircular array. In other words, from time immemorial, the men are on one side of the room, the women are on the other side of the room. Still happens. The warden endeavored to induce a charge, but failed signally, not having the tact of a general. His daughter did what she could to comfort the forces under her command, who took in refreshing rations of cake and tea, and patiently looked for the coming engagement. But she herself, Eleanor, had no spirit for the work. The only enemy whose lance she cared to encounter was not there, and she and others were somewhat dull. Loud above all voices was heard the clear, sonorous tones of the archdeacon, as he dilated to his brother parsons on the dangers of the church and the fearful rumors of mad reforms even at Oxford and the damnable heresies of Dr. Whiston. Soon, however, sweeter sounds began timidly to make themselves audible. Little movements were made in a quarter, notable for round stools and music stands. Wax candles were arranged in sconces. Big books were brought forth from hidden recesses, and the work of the evening commenced. In other words, the small group of instruments is tuning up. It is suddenly becoming audible in this group, this party, that music is getting ready to be sounded, to be heard. The big books are music scores. The wax candles will be over the music scores so that everyone can read them correctly. How often were those pegs twisted and retwisted before our friend found that he had twisted them enough? How many discordant scrapes gave promise of the coming harmony? How much of the muslin fluttered and crumpled before Eleanor and the other nymphs were duly seated at the piano? How closely did that tall Apollo, that is one of the musicians, pack himself against the wall with his flute, long as himself, extended high over the heads of his pretty neighbors? Into how small a corner crept that round and florid little minor canon, and there, with skill amazing, found room to tune his accustomed fiddle. And now the crash begins. Away they go in full flow of harmony together, up hill and down dale, now louder and louder, then lower and lower, now loud as though stirring the battle, then low as though mourning the slain. In all, through all, and above all is heard the violoncello. Not for nothing were those pegs so twisted and retwisted. Listen, listen. Now alone that saddest of instruments tells its touching tale. Silent and in awe stand fiddle, flute, and piano to hear the sorrows of their wailing brother. 'Tis but for a moment before the melancholy of those low notes has been fully realized. Again comes full force of the band. Down go the pedals, away rush 20 fingers, scoring over bass notes, with all the impetus of passion. Apollo blows till his stiff neckcloth is no better than a rope, meaning with sweat. He's working himself into a passion. So that the stiff, starched white neckcloth is now ragged with his own sweat from his endeavors. And the minor canon works both arms till he falls into a syncope of exhaustion against the wall. How comes it that now, when all should be silent, when courtesy, if not taste, should make men listen, how is it that at this moment the black-coated corps leave their retreat and begin skirmishing? One by one they creep forth and fire off little guns timidly and without precision. Ah, my men, efforts such as these will take no cities, even though the enemy should be never so open to assault. At length a much deadlier artillery is brought to bear. Slowly, but with effect, the advance is made. The muslin ranks are broken and fall into confusion. The formidable array of chairs gives way, and battle is no longer between opposing regiments, but hand to hand and foot to foot with single combatants, as in the glorious days of old when fighting was really noble. Trollope is indulging himself here in a protracted metaphor of the men and women thawing under the impetus of the beautiful music and gradually coming to meet with each other, to cross the room and intermingle. He's indulging in a protracted metaphor of a military skirmish. Not exactly an original metaphor, but you gotta love the spirit he does it. In corners and under shadow of curtains, behind sofas and half hidden by doors, in retiring windows and sheltered by hanging tapestries, are blows given in return, fatal, incurable, dealing death. This is the young people interacting with each other. Apart from this, another combat arises, more sober and more serious. The archdeacon is engaged against two prebendaries, in Percy full-blown rector assisting him in all the perils and all the enjoyments of short whist. Lots of terminology here. Prebendaries are minor church officials, and whist is a game. It's a board game. With solemn energy do they watch the shuffled pack, and all expectant eye the coming trump. With what anxious nicety do they arrange their cards, jealous of each other's eyes. Why is that lean doctor so slow, cadaverous man with hollow jaw and sunken eye, all ill-beseeming the richness of his mother church? Ah, why so slow, thou meagre doctor? See how the archdeacon, speechless in his agony, deposits on the board his cards and looks to heaven or to the ceiling for support. Hark, how he sighs with thumbs in his waistcoat, and he seems to signify that the end of such torment is not yet even nigh at hand. Vain is the hope, if hope there be, to disturb that meagre doctor. With care precise he places every card, weighs well the value of each mighty ace, each guarded king, and comfort-giving queen, speculates on knave and ten, counts all his suits, and sets his price upon the whole. At length a card is led, and quick 3 others fall upon the board. The little doctor leads again, while the lustrous eye of his partner absorbs the trick. Now thrice has this been done. Thrice has constant fortune favored of the brace of prebendaries, ere the archdeacon rouses himself to battle. But at the fourth assault he pins to the earth a prostrate king, laying low his crown and scepter, bushy beard, and lowering brow, and with poor deuce. As David did Goliath, says the archdeacon, pushing the 4 cards to his partner, and then a trump is led, and then another trump, then a king, and then an ace, and then a long 10, which brings down from the meager doctor his only remaining tower of strength, his cherished queen of trumps. What, no second club? Says the archdeacon to his partner. Only one club, mutters from his inmost stomach the pursy rector, who sits there red-faced, silent, impervious, careful, a safe but not a brilliant ally. But the archdeacon cares not for many clubs, or for none. He dashes out his remaining cards with a speed most annoying to his antagonist, pushes over to them some 4 cards that are allotted portion, shoves the remainder across the table to the red-faced rector, calls out 2 by cards and 2 by honors and the odd trick last time, marks a treble under the candlestick, and has dealt round the second pack before the meager doctor has calculated his losses. A long description of whist. Won't do anything for you if you've never even seen it played. But Trollope loved it, and his readers loved it, so he gives you a long and very energetic description of whist. And so went off the warden's party, and the men and women arranging shawls and shoes declared how pleasant it had been, and Mrs. Goodenough, the red-faced rector's wife, pressing the warden's hand, declared she had never enjoyed herself better, which showed how little pleasure she allowed herself in this world, as she had sat the whole evening through in the same chair without occupation, not speaking, and unspoken to. It might still have been a pleasant party. And Matilda Johnson, whom she allowed young Dixon to the bank to fasten her cloak around her neck, thought that £200 a year in a little cottage would really do for happiness. Besides, he was sure to be manager some day. And Apollo, the flute player, folding his flute into his pocket, felt that he had acquitted himself with honor, and the archdeacon pleasantly jingled his gains, but the meager doctor went off without much audible speech, muttering ever and anon as he went, 33 points, 33 points. I think what that means is that the archdeacon was exceptionally lucky. But anyway, I think we're done with whist talk for this chapter. And so they were all gone, and Mr. Harding was left alone with his daughter. What had passed between Eleanor Harding and Mary Bold need not be told. It is indeed a matter of thankfulness that neither the historian nor the novelist hears all that is said by their heroes or heroines, or how much would 3 volumes or 20 suffice. 3 volumes was standard release for a Victorian novel. It came out in 3 volumes, and that was sort of the set limit. Here the narrator saying if the historian, if the novelist were to listen in on everything his characters did, there wouldn't be enough room to tell the book. If you feel like crying foul, feel free to do so, because, well, we're going to hear. In the present case, so little of this sort have I overheard that I live in hope of finishing my work within 300 pages, and of completing that task, a novel in 1 volume. But something had passed between them, and as the warden blew out the wax candles and put his instrument into its case, his daughter stood sad and thoughtful by the empty fireplace, determined to speak to her father, but irresolute as to what she should say. Was the narrator present in the last chapter that I read? No. In Job the Beadsman's room at Hiram's Hospital? No, he was not present. We heard every word. Is the narrator going to be present at the conversation between John Bold later in this very chapter? No. It's silly as an excuse. And I myself wanted to hear what Eleanor and Mary said to each other. Anyway, it's well enough hinted at in the course of the chapter. Well, Eleanor, said he, are you for bed? Yes, she said, moving. I suppose so. But, Papa, Mr. Bold was not here tonight. Do you know why not? She knows perfectly well why not. She's been told in the conversation that we're not hearing, because Trollope didn't feel like interjecting it into his narration at a page length of a whist game. Anyway, he was asked. I wrote to him myself, said the warden. But do you know why he did not come, Papa? Well, Eleanor, I could guess, but it's no use guessing at such things, my dear. What makes you look so earnest about it? Oh, Papa, do tell me, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him and looking into his face. What is it that he is going to do? What is it all about? Is there any, what word to use? Any danger? Danger, my dear? What sort of danger? Danger to you, danger of trouble, or of loss, or of, oh, Papa, why haven't you told me about all this before? Mr. Harding was not a man to judge harshly of anyone, much less of the daughter, whom he now loved better than any living creature. But still he did judge her wrongly at this moment. He knew that she loved John Bold. He fully sympathized in her affection. Day after day he thought more of the matter, and with the tender care of a loving father, tried to arrange in his own mind how matters might be so managed that his daughter's heart should not be made to sacrifice to the dispute which was likely to exist between him and Bold. Now, when she spoke to him for the first time on the subject, it was natural that he should think more of her than of himself, and that he should imagine that her own cares, and not his, were troubling her. He stood silent before her a while, as she gazed up into his face, and then, kissing her forehead, he placed her on the sofa. "Tell me, Nellie," he said. He only called her Nellie in his kindest, softest, sweetest moods, and yet all his moods were kind and sweet. "Tell me, Nellie, do you like Mr. Bold much?" She was quite taken aback by the question. I will not say that she had forgotten herself or her own love in thinking about John Bold, and while conversing with Mary, she certainly had not done so. She had been sick at heart to think that a man of whom she could not but own to herself that she loved him, of whose regard she had been so proud, that such a man should turn against her father to ruin him. She had felt her vanity hurt, that his affection for her had not kept him from such a course. Had he really cared for her, he would not have risked her love by such an outrage. But her main fear had been for her father, and when she spoke of danger, it was danger to him, and not to herself. She was taken aback by the question altogether. "Do I like him, Papa?" "Yes, Nellie, do you like him? Why shouldn't you like him? But that's a poor word. Do you love him?" She sat still in his arms without answering him. She certainly had not prepared herself for the avowal of affection, intending, as she had done, to abuse John Bold herself, and to hear her father do so also. "Come, my love," he said, "let us make a clean breast of it. Do you tell me what concerns yourself, and I will tell you what concerns me and the hospital." And then, without waiting for an answer, he described to her as best he could the accusation that was made about Hiram's will, the claims which the old men put forward, what he considered the strength and what the weakness of his own position, and of course which Mr. Bold had taken, and that which he presumed he was about to take, and then by degrees, without further question, he presumed on the fact of Eleanor's love, and spoke of that love as a feeling which he could in no way disapprove. He apologized for Bold, excused what he was doing, nay, praised him for his energy and intentions, made much of his good qualities, and harped on the none of his foibles. Then, reminding his daughter how late it was, and comforting her with much assurance, which he had hardly felt himself, he sent her to bed with flowing eyes and a full heart. In other words, hearing from her father how much her father esteems the man she loves has caused her to burst into tears. So we're getting a lot here, right? We know that, for instance, John Bold's sister has told him what the warden's daughter thinks of him. And we can presume that Mary and Eleanor told each other everything at the party. And now the warden's own daughter is hearing from him what he thinks of. It's a series of sort of implied personal revelations. A modern novelist would have all these things written out. Instead, we're sort of getting a lot of this. We're realizing in the course of this chapter how much of this has never actually been said. When Mr. Harding met his daughter at breakfast the next morning, there was no further discussion on the matter, nor was the subject mentioned between them for some days. Soon after the party, Mary Bold called at the hospital, and there were various persons in the drawing room at the time, and she therefore said nothing about her brother. On the day following, John Bold met Miss Harding in one of the quiet, somber, shaded walks of the Close. He was most anxious to see her, but unwilling to call at the warden's house, and had in truth waylaid her in her private haunts. "My sister tells me," he said abruptly, hurrying on with his premeditated speech, "my sister tells me that you had a delightful party the other evening. I was so sorry I could not be there." "We were all sorry," said Eleanor with dignified composure. "I believe, Miss Harding, you understood why." At this moment, and John Bold hesitated, muttered, stopped, commenced his explanation, and again broke down. Eleanor would not help him in the least. "I think my sister explained to you, Miss Harding?" "Pray don't apologize, Mr. Bold. My father will, I am sure, always be glad to see you. If you like to come to the house now as formerly, nothing has occurred to alter his feelings. Of your own views, you are, of course, the best judge." "Your father is all that is kind and generous. He always was so. But you, Miss Harding, yourself? I hope you will not judge me harshly because, Mr. Bold," said she, "you may be sure of one thing. I shall always judge my father to be right, and those who oppose him I shall judge to be wrong. If those who do not know him oppose him, I shall have some charity enough to believe that they are wrong through error of judgment. But should I see him attacked by those who ought to know him, and to love him, and to revere him, of such I shall be constrained to form a different opinion. And then, curtsying low, she sailed on, leaving her lover in anything but a happy state of mind. So I'm thinking he's not the only one who's prepared some speech ahead of time. She is very clear on the subject. I shall always judge my father to be right, and those who oppose him I shall judge to be wrong. If those who do not know him oppose him, I shall have charity enough to believe that they are wrong through error of judgment. But should I see him attacked by those who ought to know him, and to love him, and to revere him, I shall have a very different opinion. So poor John Bold, if we can feel any sympathy for this busybody, for this Budinsky, then we do feel sympathy for him now, because the woman he loves has obviously, in the interval, made up her mind that if he opposes her father, she will oppose him. In other words, that their relationship will be over. So that is chapter 6. I love it. We got a great description of a party. People often characterize Trollope as a fox hunting author, where he really throws his heart into fox hunting scenes, but by implication, not other things. But he throws his heart into that scene. Both the wonder of the music that's being made, and also even whist. And also we see the emotional stakes. We've had the legal and the financial stakes up until now, but not so much the emotional stakes. Now we know that there are emotional stakes involved. John Bold's sister is a close friend of the Warden's daughter. The Warden's daughter loves John Bold. John Bold loves the Warden's daughter. John Bold esteems the Warden, and the Warden esteems John Bold. So if John Bold can't see his way to cry off from this dream of justice, this chimera, lots of people are going to be hurt. And not just financially. And now we know that. Now that is all laid out on this chapter. So we're going to move on to the next chapter, which Mark will read, with, I'm sure, a lot fewer editorial interruptions. Sorry about that. I will try extra hard next time. Thank you, BookTube.